We often look to the past to understand ourselves. Tonight, we turn our attention to the year 1894 and the solemn story of Nellie Pitezel. It's a case that reminds us that behind historical records are real people, whose lives were irrevocably changed by the events that transpired. This is their story, as best as it can be told. The Gilded Age was a time of dazzling progress and deep shadows, an era where fortunes could be made and lives could be lost with equal speed. It was in this world that Benjamin Pitezel, a carpenter with a wife and 5 children, sought to improve his family's station. Unfortunately, he fell into the orbit of a man who personified the era's darkest aspects, the charismatic, intelligent, and utterly ruthless Herman Webster Mudgett, a man history would come to know as Dr. H. Holmes. Pitezel became Holmes' loyal associate, a handyman and accomplice in various schemes. This fateful association would ultimately lead his family not to prosperity, but to an unimaginable tragedy that would captivate and horrify the nation. In the summer of 1894, H. Holmes devised what he presented to Benjamin Pitezel as his masterstroke, a life insurance fraud scheme. The plan was simple in its audacity. Pitezel would take out a $10,000 policy on his own life, with his wife, Carrie, named as the beneficiary. Then, with Holmes's help, Pitezel would fake his own death. They would procure a substitute body, stage an accident, and have the corpse officially identified as Benjamin Pitezel. Once Carrie collected the insurance money, Holmes and Pitezel would split the profits. To the Pitezel family, Holmes was a sophisticated doctor and a brilliant businessman, a benefactor who was guiding them toward a better life. Carrie Pitezel, in particular, trusted him implicitly. She saw him as a friend and protector, a man who had her family's best interests at heart. She had no reason to suspect that the entire scheme was a meticulously crafted trap, designed from the start to serve only Holmes's own sinister motives. The plan was set in motion in Philadelphia, but H. Holmes had no intention of finding a substitute body or allowing his partner to walk away with a share of the money. On or around September 4, 1894, inside a workshop, the scheme took a fatal turn. Instead of helping Benjamin Pitezel fake his death, Holmes murdered him. Using his medical knowledge, he rendered Pitezel unconscious with chloroform and then killed him. To complete the deception, he used benzene to stage a chemical explosion, burning his victim's face to hinder identification and make the death appear to be a tragic laboratory accident. Holmes then coolly proceeded with the next phase of his plan. He identified the body as his associate, Benjamin Pitezel, to the authorities. He even managed to have Pitezel's own daughter, 15-year-old Alice, misidentify the disfigured corpse of her father, a moment of profound and manipulated grief. The deception was a success. The death was ruled an accident, and the path was cleared for the insurance payout. With Benjamin Pitezel dead and the authorities satisfied, H. Holmes now faced the challenge of controlling the narrative and the money. He approached the grieving widow, Carrie Pitezel, with a stunning lie. He told her that the insurance scheme had gone wrong and that her husband, fearing arrest, had been forced to go into hiding in Canada. The body that had been found, he claimed, was a substitute as originally planned. He assured her that Benjamin was alive and well, and that they would all be reunited soon. To complete this reunion, he made a chilling proposal. He told Carrie that it was too dangerous for her to travel with all 5 of her children. Instead, she should entrust 3 of them, Alice, Nellie, and young Howard, to his care. He would travel with them separately and deliver them safely to their father. Lost in her grief and completely under Holmes's spell, Carrie agreed. In a heartbreaking act of trust, she handed her children over to the very man who had murdered their father, believing she was sending them on the path to a joyful family reunion. Thus began one of the most haunting journeys in American crime history. For weeks, H. Holmes traveled across the northern United States and into Canada with Alice, Nellie, and Howard Pitezel in tow. To the outside world, they may have appeared as a well-to-do man traveling with his children. But in reality, they were captives of a remorseless killer living on borrowed time. All the while, Holmes maintained a cruel and elaborate deception through the mail. He wrote a series of manipulative letters to Carrie Pitezel, filled with false reassurances. He would tell her that her husband was just a town or 2 ahead of them, and that the children were happy and eager to see their father. Simultaneously, he was leading Carrie herself on a separate, aimless journey across the country, instructing her to travel from city to city. This kept her isolated, confused, and unable to contact anyone who might expose his lies. The children were trapped, and their mother was being led on a wild goose chase, a pawn in Holmes' deadly game. In late October of 1894, the children's grim pilgrimage reached its penultimate stop in Toronto, Canada. There, Holmes rented a small house at 16 St. Vincent Lane. It was here that he planned to dispose of the 2 sisters, Alice and Nellie. He went to a local hardware store and purchased a large, sturdy travel trunk, telling the clerk he needed it for storing household goods. He also acquired the tools he would need to carry out his horrific plan. Back at the house, he prepared the trunk. He drilled a small hole through its side. His method was to be one of cold, calculated efficiency, a reflection of the methodical evil that defined him. For young Nellie and her older sister Alice, the house on St. Vincent Lane would be their final destination. The promise of seeing their father was a lie that had led them thousands of miles, only to end in a quiet, rented cellar in a foreign city. While Holmes was leading the Pitezel children to their doom, his elaborate web of deceit was beginning to unravel elsewhere. His insurance fraud had attracted the attention of the Fidelity Mutual Life Association, the company that had issued the policy on Benjamin Pitezel. They hired the Pinkerton Detective Agency to investigate their suspicions. Concurrently, a Philadelphia police detective named Frank Geyer was also looking into the case. When Holmes was finally arrested in Boston in November 1894 on an unrelated charge, the full scope of the Pitezel mystery began to emerge. With Holmes in custody, but the 3 children still missing, the case took on a new and desperate urgency. The task fell to Detective Geyer to find them. He began what seemed an impossible mission: to retrace the steps of a master manipulator across a continent, with nothing to guide him but a series of cold trails and the faint hope of finding the children alive. Detective Geyer's methodical investigation became a masterclass in police work.
He painstakingly followed the tangled path Holmes had taken, piecing together clues from hotel records, train schedules, and witness statements. The trail eventually led him to Indianapolis and then to the quiet suburb of Irvington, where Holmes had rented a small cottage months earlier. Neighbors recalled seeing Holmes with a young boy. Inside the house, Geyer conducted a thorough search. At first, it seemed a dead end. But then, Geyer turned his attention to a large pot-bellied stove in the kitchen. He meticulously sifted through the ashes and debris in the chimney flue. There, he made a heartbreaking discovery. A small assortment of human bone fragments, a piece of a child's jawbone, and several teeth. An expert pathologist later confirmed they belonged to a child between the ages of 6 and 10. It was the only physical evidence that remained of 8-year-old Howard Pitezel.
From the grim discovery in Indianapolis, Detective Geyer followed the trail north to Detroit and then across the border into Canada. His investigation led him at last to Toronto and to the small house at 16 St. Vincent Lane. Armed with a search warrant, Geyer and the Toronto police entered the property. They found it empty. Geyer's attention was drawn to the cellar, which had a soft, earthen floor. He noticed a section of disturbed earth and ordered his men to dig. About 3 feet down, their shovels struck something hard, a wooden trunk. With a sense of dread, the officers raised the heavy box from its shallow grave and pried it open. Inside, they found the badly decomposed bodies of 2 children packed tightly together. They were Alice and Nellie Pitezel. One of the bodies was identified as Nellie's due to a small, telltale deformity of her foot. The long, agonizing search was over. Detective Geyer had uncovered the final, terrible truth of what H. Holmes had done. The discoveries made by Detective Geyer in Indianapolis and Toronto sealed the fate of H. Holmes. Though he was on trial in Philadelphia only for the murder of Benjamin Pitezel, the evidence of his crimes against the children was presented to the court. It painted a picture of a man of unparalleled cruelty, a monster who had not only killed his associate, but had then systematically destroyed his family for financial gain. Holmes was swiftly found guilty and sentenced to death. Before his execution by hanging on May 7, 1896, he wrote a series of confessions, claiming responsibility for 27 murders, though the true number remains a subject of debate. But there was no doubt about his guilt in the Pitezel case. The story of Alice, Howard, and especially young Nellie serves as a tragic postscript to the legend of America's first great serial killer. They were innocent children whose trust was betrayed in the most horrific way imaginable, their lives cut short by a man devoid of humanity. Thank you for spending this time with us. Reflecting on these past events is a way of remembering the individuals involved and the impact their stories had on their communities. If you have any thoughts on today's case, we invite you to share them respectfully in the comments below. We hope you will join us again for our next true crime case.